When you work for the SCP Foundation, one certainty is that nothing, no turn of events, no scenario, is ever really unexpected. No matter how unlikely something may appear, chances are it usually happens. And if it doesn't happen here, then in an infinite multiverse of alternatives, everything that can possibly happen is statistically likely to. We've covered a few of these alternate eventualities before, a number of which revolve around the differing events in the long life of one particular anomaly, SCP-076-2, better known as Abel. In our home universe, much like he is in many others, Abel is considered to be a near-perfect warrior. His body, covered in tattoos of occult symbols and demonic faces, is capable of withstanding vast amounts of physical damage. Abel can easily take hits from the most powerful conventional weapons mankind has to offer, and survive with little more than a scratch. What's more, he can draw an endless supply of black-bladed weapons from a tiny pocket dimension. And on top of all of that, even in the event that he's bested in combat, Abel's body will rapidly disintegrate, only to reform within a large stone cube known as SCP-076-1. Like most of us, Abel has a number of almost identical counterparts that exist across the various worlds of the multiverse. One of them once had the opportunity to reconcile with his brother Cain, the man seemingly responsible for Abel's endless life of bloodshed. And once the two brothers had made peace, they could rest. In another universe, Abel worked directly with the SCP Foundation as part of a mobile task force until they turned on him. This unfurled a chain of events so cataclysmic that the entire world suffered the consequences. This alternate Abel went on a warpath against the Foundation, ultimately using SCP-914 the Clockworks to refine his destructive anomalous abilities. This allowed him to unleash chaos, slaughtering all of humanity in an omnicide that wiped the world clean of all other life, leaving Abel alone in a dead world. And then there was this version of the Immortal Warrior. Far from the Clockworks' enhanced conqueror that his alternate universe counterpart was, this Abel had long since been removed as a member of MTF Omega-7 and was gradually reconstituting his body within SCP-076-1. His most recent defeat had enraged the warrior, and he had vowed to once again be free. Although unbeknownst to him, what set this particular version of Abel apart from his other variants was the fact that he would soon encounter a certain other anomaly, something that when wielded by SCP-076-2 had the potential to completely rob him of all his centuries' worth of fighting ability and replace it with an embarrassment that would last for centuries more. But first, a quick history lesson. Much like it had been in our universe, this particular anomalous object had been recovered by the Foundation after it made its way into the hands of an unwitting police officer. The item in question was SCP-572, a particularly unique katana, unique in that it was utterly useless for fighting with and caused more harm to the person wielding it than whoever they were trying to use it against. In this universe, the sword had already changed hands a number of times. When police were called to the home of one Clarence Clancy Clancerson, he drew SCP-572 in defense and screamed at the officers that he would, quote, take their heads and with it their power. The cops who had been sent over to arrest Clancy for violent and disorderly behavior were less than threatened to see their suspect, who was somewhat out of shape, coming at them with a weapon no sharper than a butter knife. After pacifying Clancy with tasers and beanbag rounds from a 12-gauge shotgun, the police retrieved SCP-572, and then it was acquired by a Foundation operative. This all played out almost the exact same way in our universe. However, in this version of events, there was one key difference. As previously mentioned, SCP-572 was an unremarkable sword, but it had something of a storied past, passing from one unfortunate user to the next. And just as it was recovered from Clancy's house and ended up in Foundation hands, one of those former owners had just been about to reclaim the fabled weapon for himself. Meanwhile, back in this containment chamber deep under the ocean, still trapped in the stone cube he reanimated within, Abel was lost in a dream. To any other person, falling asleep to see subconscious visions of so much carnage would be horrifying. They would call it a nightmare. But to Abel, this might have been one of the sweetest dreams that he had ever experienced. All around him was a world on fire. Having returned to life once again, Abel at last bested his captors at the SCP Foundation. In his dream, he traveled the world, visiting every Foundation facility one by one and reducing them to rubble without leaving a single survivor. Then, once the work was done, he turned his barbaricism towards the wider world and began slaughtering humanity in droves. Perhaps some distant cosmic echo had reached out across the multiverse. A fragment of the life of a more refined version of himself had slipped into Abel's subconsciousness, making him dream that he, too, was the omnicidal conqueror that his other self was. Seeing such devastation in his own wake made this version of Abel eager to wake up, to revive once more, and set about making this delightful dream of destruction a deadly reality. It was while Abel was dreaming, picturing himself cutting down all who dared oppose him, that something strange seemed to happen. He had a visitor, not a visitor to his containment chamber, mind you. There was no one beyond the confines of SCP-076-1 except the security team that normally kept the stone cube under armed surveillance. No, this visitor appeared somewhere else, inside Abel's mind, approaching him as he slept. Within the warrior's slumbering fantasy, he was climbing up a mountain of skulls after having slaughtered millions, if not billions already. But as he reached the top of the pile of bones and looked out over the horizon, Abel could see that the world beyond was still living. There were just as many people alive, perhaps even more that he'd already killed. His work was not yet done. In fact, it seemed that despite all the lives the immortal madman had already claimed, he had barely even begun. "Oh, Abel," a voice tutted. "Did you really think you could do it alone?" Even though this was a dream, Abel could feel the presence of another. He pulled one of his obsidian-edged weapons from thin air and swiped in the direction the voice had come from, hitting nothing. The blade in his hand seemed to change, its dark metal transforming from solid to liquid. Coming apart in his hands, Abel's sword melted like candle wax under a hot flame, reduced to nothing in seconds. "You can't do it," the voice whispered. "You aren't strong enough, but I can help with that." Pulling out another weapon, a two-handed axe this time, Abel looked around him, trying to locate the source of the taunting noise. "Only a coward relies on cheap tricks and illusions," he growled angrily. "Show yourself! Come forward and be slain! Are you a worthy opponent? Are you worth your time?" "Are you?" the voice jested. "We shall see!" Abel yelled. Behind him, a cloaked figure silently appeared. They looked to be adorned in a robe that whipped in the biting cold wind, yet their garments weren't made of any fabric. Instead, they wore a robe made out of pure shadow. Their clothes and body comprised of the same thing. Though they lacked any tangible solid matter, it didn't stop Abel from spinning around, swinging his heavy axe in the figure's direction. Before the blade of the weapon was even halfway through the air, it had already started to become liquid, just like the swords had earlier. By the time it came down to strike at the shadowy visitor, what had once been an axe was just a flick of melted black metal, passing through the intangible specter as Abel found himself once again unarmed. "Speak, Creighton!" he demanded, never one to back away from a fight, even when his weapons were seemingly failing him. "Tell me who you are. I would like to know my adversary's name before I end your worthless life." "I am not here to fight you," the figure replied calmly. "I'm here to offer you the key to your victory, Abel." "What key?" the warrior sneered. "What could you possibly give me?" "Exactly what you need to finish it," the shadow replied, drawing something from a sheath on its belt and holding it aloft. "A weapon that will allow you to become the conqueror you long to be." Abel looked at the object in the figure's outstretched hand, a katana, or at least the shadowy vestige of one. "A sword?" he sneered. "What use do I have for a sword? I can conjure all the blades I need at will." To demonstrate, Abel pulled one of his own black blades, but yet again it began to melt away. "Your weapons have served you well, but they are disposable," the shadow explained. "A true warrior deserves a sword worthy of his fighting prowess." "I have killed scores of men throughout the ages," the immortal warrior retorted. "And I never needed any special sword to do that." "And that is why, no matter how many you kill, you will always be beaten." In his dream, Abel paused a moment, looking at the katana and considering. Then he reached his hand out to grip the shadowy hilt. In that same split second, SCP-076-2 awoke once again from his slumber and broke free of the stone cube encasing him. As he killed his way through the Foundation personnel in the facility housing SCP-076-1, Abel had only one thought in his mind. He needed that sword. You see, what the immortal maniac was unfortunately totally unaware of was the interesting effect SCP-572 could have on people. As well as being a totally useless sword, anyone who picked it up will instantly believe the Katana of Apparent Invincibility to be an all-powerful weapon of ancient legend. Despite the sword being crudely made, blunt, and generally unfit for any use, the wielder will maintain the belief that it not only has perfect balance and cutting power, but that the sword has also imbued them with unparalleled strength and invincibility to damage. And now, either through the sword itself extending this cognito-hazardous influence into Abel's dream, or by the interference of some unknown trickery, one of the most dangerous anomalous killers in the world was making a beeline straight for SCP-572, and he wasn't the only one either. At a previous point in time, a man by the name of Zach had purchased SCP-572 on eBay, but it was far more than just an oddity to him. He wasn't looking to start a sword collection. As a child, he had been obsessed with comic book superheroes, and when Zach bought that katana, he intended to use the blade to dispense vigilante justice against those who preyed on the innocent. And even before he held it in his hands, Zach too felt the anomalous pull of the katana, knowing in his heart it was the perfect weapon to transform him into a hero. Of course, he had quickly been disproven when, on his first night of crime fighting, Zach had been hit by a mid-sized sedan in a multi-story parking lot and suffered a concussion. Sent to the hospital and then charged with attempted assault, Zach had long since lost any and all interest in ever donning his costume, comprised of hockey pads and a ski mask, or picking up the sword ever again. But as time had gone on, that old familiar pull had started to gnaw at Zach, urging him to get back in the superhero game, forgetting how poorly that had worked out for him last time. One problem still stood in his way though. He needed his trusty sword back. Of course, in the time since he'd hung up his hero outfit, Clancy had gotten his hands on SCP-572, and then right before Zach could steal it back, the Foundation had taken it. It had taken him months of preparation. He'd sneakily made dealings with a janitor that worked at one of the Foundation sites. Zach had bribed the man a lot of money in exchange for his keycard and uniform, even having to take out a second mortgage on his apartment to meet the frankly extortionate amount the janitor asked for. But it would be worth the cost, Zach told himself. If it reunited him with his trusty katana, then it would be worth it. Only then would he once again be a full hero. Shuffling through the facility, Zach dragged a mop over the floor, leaving a sign to warn the slippery hazard. He whistled to himself, trying to act as casually as possible, not realizing that he was slightly overselling it. Once he was certain the coast was clear, he made his move. SCP-572 was locked in a secure deposit box within Site-19's high-value item storage facility, right where he had been cleaning. He began searching through the various anomalous oddities kept there, until he saw it. The box containing his coveted sword. All his effort in infiltrating the Foundation had finally paid off. It was all leading to this, his comeback in crime fighting. It was at this precise moment that Abel came bursting through a nearby door. Completely befuddled, Zach quickly found himself thrown to one side by the much stronger man.
"Out of my way, weakling!"
Abel roared before turning to face the deposit box holding SCP-572. Gripping the box, Abel used his superhuman strength to tear it open, as though the container was made from cardboard. There it was. Stored safely within was the weapon he had been seeking, the same all-powerful sword from his vision.
"At last,"
he declared, reaching for the hilt.
"This sword belongs to me."
The second that Abel hoisted it into the air, he felt a human weight dash towards him, only to shrug it off as it made impact. Zach tumbled to the floor, winded as Abel barely flinched at the attempted tackle.
"You fool,"
he roared.
"You dare come at me? You'll be the first to fall to my new blade, the first of this pathetic world of unworthy opponents to die in my conquest."
Zach frighteningly raised his arms in an attempt to shield himself. When Abel raised the sword menacingly above his head, The mortal man knew what the sword was capable of, or so he thought, as Abel brought the blade swiping downwards. Its true ineffectiveness as a melee weapon was on full display. SCP-572's dull, poorly balanced blade barely grazed Zack's arms as he protected his face. In fact, beyond the initial swat, it barely hurt.
I don't understand.
Abel stammered, looking at the katana in confusion.
This is meant to be a warrior blade, a weapon of champions and conquerors.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, Zack replied, also suffering from SCP-572's cognitohazardous effect. He'd fully expected to die a second ago, slain by the very weapon he had been hoping to reclaim. Still, maybe it's just because it's your first go? I could show you how to—
Silence! I will not fall for that,
Abel interrupted.
Let me see here, maybe the angle was off? Or how about I use both hands here? Let me just—
Once again, Abel hoisted the weapon, this time with both hands tightly gripping the blade, intending to bring it slashing down in a big swing like a woodsman cleaving a log in two. Unfortunately, as he raised the sword, the blade caught an exposed light fixture above. Sparks burst from the ceiling as an electrical current shot through the metal and gave Abel a nasty shock.
Oh, God! What is the meaning of this?
He shouted in frustration.
I've been alive for centuries, killed thousands upon thousands of men since the dawn of civilization. Why can't I use this sword?
Well, performance issues for a guy your age? Hardly an uncommon problem, Zack joked. Both turned at the sound of a door kicked open, the clomp of heavy boots on the ground as a Foundation security team burst in. SCP-076-2, drop your weapons and— The commander stopped mid-shout. Wait, that's not one of his regular swords, is it? Sir, that's, One of the officers paused inside. I think that's SCP-572.
Attack me!
Abel yelled at the Foundation officers, pointing the dull tip of the katana at them.
If you dare! For now I wield the greatest blade known to the universe! You will all fall in a single stroke of my new weapon. And once you have fallen, so shall the world!
SCP-076-2. Abel, look, just put the thing down, the commander urged. Trust me, you'll thank yourself.
You pathetic fools are so afraid of the chaos I will unleash,
the warrior declared.
Such unworthy opponents!
Okay, I've seen enough, the security commander sighed. Deadly force authorized. Light 'em up, boys! On the commander's signal, a hail of gunfire erupted, bullets raining down on Abel. He slashed SCP-572 through the air, certain that what he thought was a mighty sword could easily cut through the oncoming bullets. Of course, that may have been true if SCP-572's only real power was not having any power at all. Each shot struck Abel's center mass, barely damaging him given his body's natural resilience to harm, particularly from such small arms fire. Although he didn't find it any less annoying that he couldn't seem to properly wield his new katana.
Oh, are you kidding me?
He huffed to himself.
What is with me today? Can't get the hang of this thing. Come on, Abel, it's still a sword. The weapon that will allow me to conquer this whole world, but if I can just get the swing right!
Calmly knowing that the weapon itself posed no threat, even in the hands of an immortal mass murderer, the security team moved in to apprehend Abel. Before they could take the katana from his hands, he dashed towards them, swiping the sword back and forth, hoping to at least hit someone to get the ball rolling on his omnicidal rampage. Instead, thanks to the influence of SCP-572, he miscalculated, took a wrong step, and slipped over on a patch of freshly mopped tile, landing in a heap next to a wet floor sign. The security team all winced, feeling the second-hand embarrassment practically radiating off of Abel as the ancient anomalous warrior lay on the floor after a spectacular fall. Then, one by one, they all burst out into uncontrollable fits of laughter. But while they were distracted, they were completely oblivious to Zack, who emerged from his hiding place and picked SCP-572 up off the floor. He breathed a sigh of relief, reunited with his prized weapon, having forgotten the severe injury it caused him last time.
You,
Abel wheezed, still lying in a puddle of mop water.
Who are you?
Zack gave a slight smile, unzipping the janitor's overalls he had on to reveal a set of hockey pads underneath. He slipped a ski mask over his face before turning back to Abel and replying in his most epic voice,
I'm Captain Katana.
Unfortunately, his return to crime fighting would be as short-lived as Abel's own turn with SCP-572, as Captain Katana found himself hit by a bus on his way home after trying to use the Katana of Apparent Invincibility to cut said bus in half down the middle, and failing in a rather painful fashion. Want an anomaly of your own? Check out www.scpswag.com for high-quality SCP merch. Now go and check out, is SCP-572 the most dangerous weapon ever? And SCP-076 Able vs. Chainsaw Man, who has the most lethal weapon, to get your weapon fanatic fix.